Okay, welcome back to the Canadian Tank Museum. It's Rich Bennett, the Vehicle Section Director here, and we're going to take another look at our T72 engine. If you've been following along, you've seen one of our other videos talking about kind of the components of it, where it goes, this and that, and some other engines. But now we're going to take a deeper look. So just a little background. The engine was developing a problem with the oil pump, so we were seeing loss of oil pressure, that kind of thing, and then we had zero oil pressure. Upon initial investigation, we found that the oil pump drive shaft is actually broken. That's not the root cause of it. It looks like it might have been a sludging issue. We don't know where this tank was in service. We don't know how long it was in service or under what kind of conditions. So this is something that's been ongoing for quite some time. And we're just dealing with the fallout, essentially. So an engine that was in service needed maintenance, and now we're at this stage. So if you remember last video, you would have seen a whole bunch of stuff on the front of the engine, the back of the engine. We've actually had the opportunity to get the lower crankcase half off and expose all our bearings, our main bearings, our rod bearings. Now we can't really do too much with the rod bearings because we haven't quite figured out how far we want to get into it to get them apart, but the main caps we have taken off, some of them. One of them shows distinct signs of heating. Another one, the bearing was actually missing a lot of the babbitt, and we're going to take a look at those in a minute, but this is a good opportunity to see what this engine looks like on the underside with the pan off. Now this was originally designed from an aircraft engine, so all the components are aluminum, and I know you're going to sit there and think, who makes main caps out of aluminum? Well, I can tell you that the Russians do. And that adds to a little bit more complexity when you're doing repairs because aluminum yields, so you could deform stuff, melt stuff, leads to different sorts of problems. One of the problems that we did find, and you're going to see a picture of it shortly, is the crank counterweight against one of the main bearings is actually cracked in two places, and it will actually open up to about 1/4 inch on either side. Now, why it didn't fail when it was running, I have no idea. I've heard stories about these engines running with damage to them and not failing. So it really surprised us to find that. So we'll take a walk over here. I've actually got the bearing caps out. Now this bearing cap here is one of the mains. You can see how dark it is. Normally they're like a light brown color because they're painted. This one is actually showing damage, showing that it's actually melted. So if we take a close look at it, you can see the little melt lines in it. It's supposed to have a little peg for the bearing. There's damage here where it's actually worn through. So the crank was riding on this. This hole's no longer round, so it's been taking impacts. And the bearing that would have sat in this saddle is right here. And you can see that's typical of a worn bearing. There's pieces missing. It's been spinning. There's a little peg that's supposed to hold this bearing in right there. That hole has been filled with aluminum, and that peg got dragged around the outer surface of the shell into the other one when this whole bearing assembly spun in the housing. Okay, the engine didn't seize. It didn't make any obvious noises that there was a problem. Russian engines are very loud, they're very clunky, but you couldn't tell. Until we lost oil pressure, we were like, okay, what happens here? This doesn't happen immediately when you lose oil pressure. When they lost the oil pressure, they shut the engine down right away. What we were noticing was some oil pressure issues on priming. It was a little bit lower, but that kind of started the whole investigation. This is another main bearing cap. You can see it's deformed here. It's widened out a bit. You can see where the bearing shell rode inside. There's a little pin that's supposed to be there to hold it in place. The shells themselves are supposed to be as wide as the cap. Okay, the shell that we got here is down to the steel. There's nothing left on it. That would sit in there like this, and this one has actually been moving around, hitting the pin. The pin moves a bit, and you can see that it's thinner than the main web. So this has actually been taking impacts, hammering up and down. So the clearances there must have been quite large. Now the engine's about 16.5 to 1 compression. It really shouldn't do a lot of this stuff. We found all the bolts tight. Everything was the way we would expect to see it, with the exception of the wear issues. Now, you think to yourself, what all do I have to get out to get at some of this stuff? We're doing further maintenance, getting at our other oil pumps, which necessitates taking out the cooling fan, some shrouding, the whole back deck, because we want to get down to the point where we're sure we've covered everything and everything's clean and ready for service. This little gem here is the starter generator. That normally sits in the engine compartment. We're going over it, making sure it's okay, because you want to be able to electrically start the vehicle if your air system is not available. Now you're going to get a unique chance to take a look at the inside of the oil pan. So this is what they call the lower crankcase assembly. Now normally this would be in here like that and bolted down, but we've removed it so that we can see what's underneath it. So there's some clips and stuff associated with holding it down. But if you look through the sump, you're going to see pieces of bearing. Okay, that's out of one of the main bearings. There's a lot of stuff in the bottom of this pan that's from bearings. And it's been there for a while. You can see it all goes back to all the holes. This is where your main oil pump would sit. The screen's taking suction from the oil pump. These gears here are driven off the crank, and they feed stuff like your cooling pump, your oil scavenging pump. But this all goes together on the lower crankcase half. It's pretty complicated. It's not something you see all the time. But one unique feature that you don't see a lot, there's no gasket on this oil pan. Okay, what the Russians did when they put this together was they used cord. And that cord is actually what would seal that surface. And you can see the trace of it around here as it goes around. And that's what they use to seal the lower crankcase half. Now you got to remember the oil level is going to be well below this, so unlike a normal oil pan where the oil comes right up to the level of the flange, the oil is much lower here, so you don't really need a really heavy gasket around here. So a little bit of cord does the job. So we're going to take a walk around, and we'll take a quick look in the back of the T72 here, just to see how far we've went. The last picture that you would have seen was just the engine removed. But now this is where the fan would be with the shrouding. The starter would have been in behind here. This is where the fan drive goes, hooks up to this shaft. So this area is now all open so we can clean it up. One of our goals is to get the oil reservoir out, because we want to go through all the lines and make sure there's no sludge in the oil reservoir or the lines to it and from it. So that's ongoing. That's while we're deciding how we're going to fix the engine and get an engine out of our monument and go over it. This is what we're doing in the background to keep the project moving forward. So we're going to take a little walk. We're going to go around and we'll take a look at the reason why we had the oil pump apart in the first place. And then we can show you the little oil pump that we use for priming that's in the tank and the little motor associated with it. So.